Sam Raimi's Green Goblin movie is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions as we watch our protagonist, Norman Osborn, try to maintain control of the successful company he built himself while also juggling the demands of single fatherhood.
You know how much I sacrificed?
It's all brought crumbling down by a monstrous genetic freak who worms his way into Norman's son's life with dire consequences. Let's break down Green Goblin's heroic journey and how the menace Spider-Man ruined his life right now. This video is brought to you by the Daily Bugle, New York's only totally fair and unbiased source of news you can completely trust. For realsies, honestly, fact.
Spider-Man, a psychopath!
Anyways, Spider-Man is a menace, a punk kid who destroys the life of a good-natured, hardworking, man-of-the-people billionaire, and I've always applauded Sam Raimi for how he structures this movie. I would say it's a pretty bold choice to follow the villain Spider-Man for most of the movie's runtime. Heck, he even names the movie after the bad guy instead of the hero Green Goblin. It's so wild. But that's why we love Sam Raimi and presumably why we all love the first Spider-Man movie, right? And it's a choice that I think completely pays off. By making it look like Green Goblin is more of a supporting player than the hero, it makes Green Goblin's fate all the more tragic and just really makes us hate Peter Parker by the end. Let me explain what I mean by going through the movie and pointing out why Green Goblin is one of the greatest heroes of all time. So the film begins with an opening narration from the bad guy Peter Parker, something that I think Black Panther might pay homage to 18 years later. Still unsure about that connection though.
The story of my life is not for the faint of heart.
But it's Peter talking about how his story is not for the faint of heart, and his actions are all driven by the girl who lives next door to him, Mary Jane Watson. You see, Peter's room is like 5 feet away from Mary Jane's room, and living next to her all these years, Peter has developed a bit of a crush. Some might say obsession. See, Peter's the type of guy who, after listening to Mary Jane break down crying thanks to being yelled at by an abusive father, he follows her for a few blocks muttering to himself about asking her out. Like, dude, give her a break. Anyways, this first introduction of Peter shows him being picked on relentlessly by everyone. Even the other nerds don't like him.
Don't even think about it.
So it turns out Peter's class is going on a field trip to Columbia University's science department, and it's here where we meet our hero, Norman Osborn, and his son Harry. I love this first scene with them because it establishes everything you need to know about Norman and his relationship with his son. One of the first things that Norman says to Harry is,
"Don't ever be ashamed of who you are."
That's nice. And it's here we learn how hard it is for Norman to be a father. He's tried to send Harry to all sorts of private schools to give him more opportunities, but Harry flunked out of all of them, and he gives his dad a lot of attitude. Not cool, Harry. So now, our hero and villain meet for the first time, where Norman meets Peter Parker. Norman is impressed with Peter. I mean, why wouldn't he be? Peter is supposedly a science whiz, and that's the type of attitude that Norman wishes his son would have. I'm sure Norman sees a lot of himself in Peter, but oh man, then we get to our true villain origin story. While on the field trip, Peter is once again distracted by Mary Jane and asks if he could take her picture for the school paper. He then proceeds to take like 100 pictures of her and is so caught up in his obsession that he doesn't notice the spider coming down from the ceiling where it bites him and leaves a nasty mark. Now, if I personally took a field trip and was learning about genetically engineered super spiders and then a bright red and blue spider came down from the ceiling and bit me, I think I would probably tell someone, wouldn't you? Just as a precaution, maybe? I mean, Peter has to go home on the bus and then make it home afterwards, and you're telling me he doesn't raise any red flags? It's the birth of a villain, I tell ya. Well, you know the rest. He develops superpowers, he starts food fights at school, he tries to win over Mary Jane by buying a car, he beats up a wrestler, he lets a robber get away, thanks, gets immediate karmic comeuppance, all that jazz. And as far as villain origin stories goes, it totally works. He's successfully established himself as a threat that needs to be stopped. But now, let's focus on Norman's origin story, you know, the hero. You see, Norman has started and runs Oscorp, a billion-dollar corporation that is being leaned on by the military to supply new weaponry and supplies. Norman is definitely feeling the crunch here. On top of his troubled home life, being a single father raising his son who won't rise to his full potential, he's struggling to fulfill the military's contracts on time. The evil General Slocum is adamant adamant about seeing the results of human performance enhancers, and as much as Norman and his team has worked hard on the product, it's just not quite ready yet. And yet, Slocum tells Norman that if they don't start human trials immediately, they will go with the rival Quest Aerospace instead. So what does Norman do? He decides to test the human performance enhancer on himself. On himself! This dude is probably one of the richest in all of New York City. He's the leader at his company. His name is on the door. And instead of finding someone who they could probably pay a lot of money to test for them, Norman doesn't want that.
You gotta do things yourself.
He does it himself. Peter Parker accidentally got superpowers. Norman stood up and made it happen. Wow, so admirable. With his newfound superpowers, he's able to take down the conniving Dr. Strom, who was trying to sink the deal anyways.
We need to take the whole line back to formula.
And Norman Osborn's time as a hero begins as he takes out the evil corporation Quest Aerospace's exoskeleton test. Win-win. And it's a good thing, too, that Norman gets his superpowers at this time because his personal and professional life is about to fall apart. First, he's doing his weekly inspection of the big New York apartment where Harry and Peter are living, presumably because he's paying for it and wants to make sure Harry is putting in the work at school, which, surprise, he's obviously struggling with. Shocker. Again, Norman gives Harry all these opportunities, and Harry doesn't rise to meet them. Shame. So, of course, Norman is going to feel some type of connection with Peter. Peter, in his secret good guy disguise, comes across as this hardworking everyman who's also pretty brilliant, and Norman wants to help him out. Peter is obviously struggling a bit financially, and Norman offers his vast amount of resources to help. Peter says he wants to make an honest living and earn what he gets. Norman is so impressed. Peter definitely has him fooled because he turns around and starts selling pictures of himself. Yeah, real honest there, Peter. So after Norman's generosity is rebuked, he goes back to a board meeting where he thinks everything is hunky-dory. Norman's done it. He's secured more contracts and has surpassed Quest Aerospace as the principal supplier to the United States military. It's great news. Costs are down and revenues are up, and stock has never been higher. This should be a time for celebration. But nope, the board of directors pull a jerk move and inform Norman that they are selling Oscorp to Quest Aerospace. What? They couldn't even get their exoskeleton thingy to work properly. Outrageous. Then these board members, who seem to have been friends with Norman for years, drop another casual bombshell that Norman is essentially fired. The deal won't go through with him at the company, so they're asking him to resign.
The board expects your resignation in 30 days.
Come on, he started the company and sacrificed so much to make it successful, and now this greedy board of directors wants to show him the door and do something presumably more evil with the company? Truly heartbreaking. Then Norman has to watch as the lead board member drinks some coffee or tea or something in the most evil way possible. You ever notice that? But Norman knows that he's got to rise up to be a hero. Sure, he could retire and repair his relationship with his son, but he knows he's got to stop corporate greed. These guys are evil, and he decides to stop the board members while he still can. At the Unity Day Festival, he goes there with the intention of getting revenge on those who have wronged him. And yeah, I get that it's a dark choice to have your hero unalive his enemies, but I think this movie is what gave Zack Snyder his inspiration for the DCEU. Anyways, Norman goes to the Unity Day Festival and does what any hero would do in this situation, and turns the bad guys to skeletons using a pumpkin bomb. And yeah, I chalk this up to Norman not technically being in full control of his powers yet.
You killed them.
We killed them.
But there's a little collateral damage. Turns out Harry and Mary Jane are there. They're dating now, which is good for Harry since he's essentially saving her from the awkward Peter Parker. The bomb causes the balcony they're on to start collapsing, and Mary Jane is precariously close to falling. Norman, wanting to help, flies up to Mary Jane and introduces himself with
Hello, my dear.
the most kindly voice that you can imagine. But before he can save Mary Jane, Spider-Man shows up and kicks Norman off his glider, probably because he wants Mary Jane all to himself. Spider-Man's actions cause the glider to go wild into the crowd below and basically causes pandemonium. Way to go, Spider-Man. Norman then has to defend himself against cops who don't understand that he's a good guy, and Spider-Man who keeps wanting to beat him up. Spider-Man essentially disables Green Goblin's glider and takes Mary Jane for himself. It's a win for the bad guys here, essentially leaving Mary Jane to start revealing her own dark side as she's clearly attracted to the villain Spider-Man. I always loved how Mary Jane turns out to be the secondary villain in this movie. Bold choice, don't you think? After this, Norman comes face to face with his new super persona in a split personality type of way. The new Norman tells old Norman that he is the reason all these good things are happening to him now. And as much as Norman wants to continue what he's doing, there's still one who can stop him: Spider-Man. And this is one of my favorite moments of the movie. Norman just eliminated his board of directors' enemies because obviously they were evil to the core. But I think he sees something in Spider-Man: potential.
Imagine if he joined us.
How inspiring is that? So Norman heads to his only lead, the Daily Bugle. The newspaper probably made our hero Norman a bit upset. I mean, they named him
Green Goblin. You like that? Mr. Jameson. Made it up myself.
Well, that's kind of sinister, right? Anyways, Norman comes knocking, returns J. Jonah Jameson's cigar to him, and crashes through the window. Yes, that looks kind of bad, and I always wondered why he just crashed through like this, but in my head, I always thought it was because Spider-Man messed up Green Goblin's glider at the Unity Festival, and it's still glitching out. Anyways, while he's asking Jonah who Spidey's photographer is, Spider-Man then shows up. And is there a big brawl here putting innocent lives at risk like last time? Nope. Norman's learned his lesson and hits Spider-Man with sleeping gas and takes him somewhere private and safe. The Green Goblin tries to appeal to Spider-Man's sense of humanity. He puts forward the idea that the two of them should join forces.
Join me. Imagine what we could accomplish together.
He wants Spider-Man to turn away from the dark path he's on before it's too late. He tells Spider-Man that their fighting will cause countless innocent deaths, and Norman doesn't want that. He even lets Spider-Man think it over, and it sets up a final confrontation full of heartbreak and betrayal. So I do think Norman's plea to Spider-Man might have worked, only immediately afterwards, Spider-Man gets kissed by Mary Jane, and it messes with his emotions, and now both of them remain committed to their menace-like ways. Bummer. The villain Spider-Man sees the Daily Bugle paper that paints the picture of Green Goblin and Spider-Man as a team, and I think Peter gets the idea that he can try to be a good guy to score points. He rescues a baby from a burning building, something we can't prove he didn't start in the first place, and then comes face to face with Green Goblin again. Norman's probably there to help out as well. He asks Spider-Man about his generous proposal, and Spider-Man insults him. Shame. Then the two fight again in a way that scratches Peter's arm. Even though he's tired from the fire and the fight, Norman still sees how important it is that he celebrates Thanksgiving with Harry. He even picks up a fruitcake. Peter arrives at the apartment telling everyone that he
Had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these cranberries.
something that honestly is probably true. Right before Norman is about to carve the turkey, he notices the cut on Peter's arm and realizes the impossible. His son's best friend, who Norman has grown to admire and love so much as presumably another son, is the evil Spider-Man. I think Norman can put two and two together here. He knows Spider-Man has a thing for MJ after the Unity Festival, and now he sees Harry getting close to her. He can't cause a scene or else Peter might be suspicious, so Norman has to fake outrage and leave. He insults MJ so everyone can hear, and it works in getting her out of the apartment. A tough scene, but realistically, Norman probably thought he was saving MJ's life, which makes it all the more sad when she turns out to be a bad guy. Anyways, the war between the two escalates. Norman makes some tough choices, I'm not gonna lie. He goes after Aunt May, who was pretty rude at Thanksgiving, so maybe Norman thought Aunt May was in cahoots with Peter, but when he sees she's just an old lady saying a prayer, Norman helps her finish her prayer before leaving. Nice. Then Harry comes to Norman saying that somehow Peter has made MJ fall in love with him, and it breaks Harry's heart. It's here where Norman realizes he hasn't been a great father to Harry. He was blinded a bit too much by his admiration for Peter that he forgot his own son. I think here he also realizes MJ is actually the secret second villain of the movie, and now Spider-Man and MJ need to be stopped. Norman tells his son that he's proud of him and goes off for a final fight since he's the only one who can stop these two. Just know that this is Green Goblin at his lowest. I think Norman believes he has to stoop to Spider-Man's level to beat him, but then slowly realizes that he's gone a little off the deep end with heroics. I mean, it's tough when the entire city of New York is brainwashed and is on Spidey's side, right? So I totally forgive Norman for dangling a tram full of children over the river. I mean, it was probably just for show anyways, right? But okay, skip to the end, and the final fist fight is brutal. Norman talks about how he offered Spider-Man friendship and Peter spat in his face. And there's a false sense of accomplishment that turns this movie into a tragedy. Norman is winning the fight, and in his big heroic moments where he tells Peter that he stopped him and he's gonna handle the other bad guy, Mary Jane, as well, it causes us audience members to cheer. But kind of like Oberon in Game of Thrones, it's too good to be true. Peter's obsession with MJ takes over and he totally turns the tables, beating Norman to an inch of his life. Norman tries a Hail Mary. He can't beat this brute in a straight fist fight, so he tries to use his smarts to outwit Peter, appealing to Peter's obsessive nature while setting up a trap of his own. Unfortunately, the villain's OP spider sense is too strong, and our hero, Norman Osborn, ends up impaling himself with his own glider. His last words are,
Don't tell Harry.
presumably, he doesn't want to be a martyr to his son, which is just, it's just so inspiring. In the end, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie is about the dangers of being a superhero. Norman Osborn got the power he needed in order to save his company and start to repair his relationship with his son, but it attracted a dangerous enemy that, in the end, he just couldn't beat physically. But that's not to say he didn't change the villain Peter. The very end sees Peter rejecting Mary Jane and hints at some sort of redemption for the villain in a future movie, and also unwittingly sets Harry on his own superhero path.
One day Spider-Man will pay.
Truly, it's a great ending, and it's why this film stands as one of the greatest, boldest superhero movies of all time. Superhero movies can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, and although I'm interpreting it one way, I'd be very curious on if you guys read this movie in a different way maybe. Let me know. They don't make heroes like Green Goblin anymore. Go ahead and drop your favorite Green Goblin moment in the comments below so we can remember what a great hero he was to so many people. Man, what an awesome and totally correct analysis of that movie. Thanks for watching CBR. See you next time.